BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Thursday, another Dahlia Thursday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Thursdays, I talk to you guys about the Black Dahlia murder, one of the most horrific crimes in American history. And in this episode, I will be discussing the coroner's report from Dr. Frederick Newbarr, as well as looking at some other sources. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Black Dahlia murder. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. And in addition to Dahlia Thursday, there are other programs here on Black Box Online Radio. On Tuesdays, I started talking about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. But more famously, on Mondays, I talk about the Zodiac Killer, Zodiac Monday. So I would like to let you know that this episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. This series explores the Zodiac case in depth. It covers the facts of the case in Volume 1, fact-based speculation in Volume 2, and the third volume ties it all together. You can get these books anywhere true crime books are sold, and if you like it, please give Michael a 5-star review. Now in this episode, I will be talking about Frederick Newbarr's report, the coroner who performed the autopsy on Elizabeth Short. But last week on the channel, I was talking about a source from Crime Library, which is more or less an ebook that was written by Greg McCrary. And his chapter 1 is called The Crime Scene, and I would like to look at that. And if anybody would like to read this in its entirety, it's actually a very brief and easy to follow read. It's called The Black Dahlia Profiled by Greg McCrary. So just to provide an introduction to the story, we're going to look at his chapter 1, The Crime Scene. A local resident of Los Angeles came across the dismembered nude body of a dark-haired young woman on a vacant overgrown lot. It was mid-morning on January 15th of 1947. Will Fowler, a local reporter who arrived at the scene, wrote about the case in his book Reporters, Memoirs of a Young Newspaperman, and also later involved in the case was John Gilmore, who collected extensive documentation to write the book Severed, the shocking true story of the Black Dahlia murder. In terms of the relevant geosocial factors, Leimert Park was a neighborhood of mostly young families, and while some lots were abandoned by developers and they were cluttered with weeds, this one was fairly exposed. Several people who had walked by it earlier that morning after 6:30, while it was still dark, claimed they hadn't seen a corpse. And 6:30 in the morning, I think that almost everybody expects that, yes, Elizabeth Short's body was deposited there after daylight. And furthermore, I'm also very keen to note something that's been consistent throughout our Black Dahlia observations here on Dahlia Thursday, and that is that there was a relatively wide open space. There was a relatively clear viewpoint for an extended space, so it's kind of shocking that nobody saw the disposal, that nobody reported on anything, and I think the person who dumped Elizabeth Short's body at that site simply just made sure that the coast was clear, but definitely, I think that this was done in the early morning after sunrise. So they claimed they hadn't seen a corpse because 1 foot was only 5 inches from the sidewalk and the skin was starkly white against the grass. It would have grabbed attention. Whoever had placed it there had done so brazenly during the daylight hours. The chief of the crime lab surmised that the body had been dumped after the dew had settled before dawn, while the grass was still wet. And another thing that I have gathered on Dahlia Thursday is the reason why they believe that her body was placed there after the dew had set is because she was actually placed face down first and then turned over, and the morning dew was on her face. So this suggests that somebody had first put her down and then turned the body. The chief of the crime lab surmised that the body had been dumped after the dew had settled, but before dawn, while the grass was still wet. By that time, the victim, soon identified by fingerprints as aspiring actress Elizabeth Short, had been dead for approximately 12 hours. well, 10 to 12 hours. I mean, yeah, it does say 10 to 12 hours, excuse me. But I'm like, well, now wait a second. Elizabeth Short's body could also have been refrigerated. So this is something we need to bear in mind. Maybe it was longer than that, and who really knows is another part of the mystery, because this is January 15th, and Elizabeth Short was last seen on January 9th. And this is one of the equally mind-boggling parts of the mystery. What was she doing for those 5 days? And I mean, yes, that would be 5 days. And was it something horrific? Was it something innocent? I tend to lean on the part of foul play. Various witnesses reported seeing different cars in the area, including a black sedan and possibly a Ford with mud spattered on the fender. It was creeping along the driveway of the vacant lot around 6 a.m. without its lights on. It stopped against the curb, idling. No one had seen the driver. What really grabbed the attention of the detectives and reports alike, and what about the significant for behavioral analysis, were the condition of the body and the position. And I think absolutely, if anything, for me, the condition of the body is one that stands out more, because it really shows a certain amount of maliciousness about everything that was done to Elizabeth Short. And we're going to find out all the details. And the positioning, I think, as I've said on some previous Dahlia Thursdays, was done for humiliation. But we are going to look at the comments that were made by Dr. Frederick Newbarr, the coroner who examined the body. And there is a note that says that this was a challenge even for experienced forensic pathologists. Dr. Newbarr succeeded in itemizing the many horrific mutilations inflicted on the victim. The final report, with its staccato-like scientific terminology, made chilling reading. And these are beginning the notes of Dr. Frederick Newbarr. The body was that of a female, about 15 to 20 years of age, measuring 5 feet 5 inches in height and weighing 115 pounds. There were multiple lacerations to the face, inflicted by a sharp knife in particular, a deep laceration over 3 inches long which extended from the corners of the mouth. The teeth were in an advanced state of decay. The 2 upper central incisors were very loose, and 1 lower incisor was also loose. The rest of the teeth showed cavities. The head showed evidence of severe blows, although the skull had not been fractured. Depressed ridges in the wrist suggested that the girl had been strung up by the wrists and tortured. The blows to the head and the lacerations to the mouth had been delivered while the victim was alive. It was these, Newbarr decided, that had probably killed her. The rest of the lacerations had been inflicted upon her when dead, including a distinctive network of crisscrossed slashes to parts of the body and across the pubic region, where the hair had been removed and cut off. There was no evidence of strangulation or suffocation. And I'm just going to read that again, because I think that that's going to be a very important thing to remember. There was no evidence of strangulation or suffocation. The grass upon which the body was laid had been wet with dew, suggesting that it had been placed there before dawn. But I think that this is definitely going to be after 6:30 p.m. I mean, we're going to be dealing with January, so the dawn rise is going to be considerably later. Did I say p.m.? 6:30 a.m. No, because I mean, if passerbys did not notice this, I don't think the body was there. I really don't believe that. Like, if I can be very frank, I don't think that Elizabeth Short's body was just sitting there and nobody noticed, that people are walking up and down the street and they actually thought, hey, look, a mannequin. Or they thought, hey, what's that over there? Oh, I'm going to ignore it. You also heard the thing from Craig McCrary where it says that one of her feet was only 5 inches from the sidewalk. So I think that the more conventional times where they're saying that her body was placed there around dawn rise, but we have to remember that it would still be relatively light out. I don't believe that she was dumped in the dark, and that 6:30 sounds way too early. The grass upon which the body was laid was wet with dew, suggesting that it had been placed there before dawn. Newbarr was one of the view that the death had occurred 24 hours previously, and probably less. A square of tissue had been removed from the right breast, and there were multiple lacerations and scratches on the surface of the left. Healed scars on the chest suggested an old operation on the lungs. This was corroborated by the fact that while the left lung was healthy, the right had pleural adhesions. Both arms were covered in cuts and scratches. Her nails were very short and bitten to the quick. The palms of her hands were roughened with calluses. The hair was dark brown but had been hennaed, with the original dark strands beginning to grow out. On each foot there was a big toenail that was painted bright red. The trunk was completely severed by an incision that was cut through the intestine and through the soft disc between the vertebrae. It appeared that a very long, sharp, long-bladed butcher's or carving knife had been used to sever the body, and that the killer might have used a straight razor to inflict torture before death. And this is one of the most frustrating aspects of the case, because this is going to show that perhaps Elizabeth Short did indeed suffer. And when I started Dahlia Thursday, I was looking at some of these things about how a lot of the injuries were inflicted post-mortem, but it does appear that some things were torturous. It's absolutely horrible. The organs of the abdomen were entirely exposed, with lacerations of the intestines and both kidneys. There was no evidence of pregnancy, and the uterus was small. There was, however, evidence of what Newbarr delicately described as female trouble. This was later explained as a cyst on a gland. There was also a gaping laceration 4¼ inches long, extending down from the navel to the pubis. A latticework of cuts had been made on both sides of this laceration, above the pubic bone. There was also a square pattern of lacerations in the hip, and an irregular shape of flesh that had been removed from the front of the left thigh. While the vaginal canal remained intact, the anal opening had been markedly dilated, with multiple abrasions indicating insertion of a foreign object. The soles of the feet were stained brown, and the stomach was filled with feces and unidentifiable particles. All smears for spermatoza were negative, and the corpse was completely clean and drained of blood, indicating that the killer had been accomplished, that the killing had been accomplished at a different location from which the body was found. And I may have said that in one of the earliest episodes. I think it was the second episode of Dahlia Thursday, that yes, absolutely, the killing occurred in a different location. Was somebody out there performing a surgical murder in a vacant lot in Los Angeles? I mean, it's shocking that they were able to dump the body without being witnessed. It's shocking that her body was there as long as it was without anybody noticing it. But yes, of course, the murder was committed in a different location, and her body was transported there. I just think that goes without saying. Perhaps he has to put this stuff in reports for professional reasons or legal reasons. But yes, of course, her body was dumped there, and the killing took place in a different location. But I do want to throw in this interjection, because are you noticing something? Does something stand out to you? Something stands out to me, and that is that it's possible that there was some type of sexual element that was going on, but Elizabeth Short was not raped. She was not essayed in the conventional sense. It's possible that something was done to her anus, and that would count as a type of sexual assault. But overall, I'm really seeing that this is not necessarily about somebody trying to get sexual access to her. This is more or less something that is done for domination, and whatever type of sexual arousal the killer got out of this, it seems like it's happening in his own mind. Was this a sexually sadistic crime? Yes, absolutely. I believe that this was a sexually sadistic crime, but it wasn't one where somebody wanted to have intercourse with her, to the best of our knowledge now. Again, there could be some type of penetration that went on with the anus, but that's very, very speculative. Perhaps I should have said this person did not want to have conventional intercourse with her. I don't think that that's what this is, and then they wanted to just dominate her, and it all went awry. I think that this is some deranged thinking. And if you're listening to this now, and everything that you've heard about what happened to Elizabeth Short, Do you not think that this was some type of deranged thinking? You can put your response in the comments section down below. I don't think that this is a typical case of a woman rejected a man and then she decided to respond by just, like, he decided to respond by attacking her. She says no to him. She denies him sex. So he's like, hey, come here. I'm going to teach you a lesson. No, no. I don't think that that's what happened. This is far too elaborate for something like that to have happened. Instead, this seems to be the case of somebody who has some very, very perplexing thinking. And I think John Douglas even remarked about this in his psychological profile when he said that this person most likely has a mental illness or a combination of mental illnesses, but he's still able to function in daily life. He might be, excuse me if I'm going to use some unfriendly language, but he might be a little bit bonkers, but he would still be able to hide it. Let's keep going with this description here. The corpse was completely clean and drained of blood, indicating that the killing had been accomplished at a different location. Fibers from what appeared to have been a stiff brush revealed that the body had been thoroughly scrubbed, particularly in the pubic region and points of mutilation. The fibers were sent to the FBI for analysis, and they were found to be of coconut hair, probably from a cheap scrubbing brush. They were of no assistance to possible identification. Dr. Newbarr's report made it clear that the majority of the gruesome mutilations had been performed on the dead woman's body after death. As we've heard, most of them, but not all, so that's very, very saddening. They suggested necrophilia and a fetishism with knives. The blows to the head and lacerations to the face, on the other hand, had been performed when the victim was still alive. They were hallmarks of sadistic lust murder. Yes, I do think this was a sadistic lust murder. I think I was very, very clear about that. But I don't think that this is just because she denied somebody sex. Maybe she denied somebody who had some extremely deranged thinking. That stuff I do agree with. Having a mental illness or a combination of mental illnesses, bonkers, and then this person had a very, very adverse reaction, but this is not typical behavior. Absolutely this is not typical behavior. I start out Dahlia Thursday by telling you that this is one of the most horrific crimes in American history for a reason. There was much discussion about the clean nature of the bisection of the body, and the fact that the corpse had been professionally drained of blood. It was speculated that the killer had medical training or experience with handling corpses in a mortuary. While the possibility that the killer was a doctor was entertained, this was not a requisite. And I'm finally glad that we're getting to these points here and we're able to have these discussions because, it seems like this crime was committed by a doctor, right? But you guys already know the alternative possibilities. Perhaps you guys listening to Dahlia Thursday right now can tell me the alternative possibilities. Number one, you just heard one right here. Somebody who worked in a mortuary. Number two, somebody who worked in a funeral home. Not the mortuary specifically, but the funeral home. Somebody who worked in a slaughterhouse, and somebody who was a traveling individual who sold mechanical and industrial parts that were relevant to certain professions. There are a wide range of possibilities. I was really trying to avoid saying plumbing supplies because Red Manley, a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder, was a traveling salesman for plumbing supplies. I absolutely do not think that he did it, but I also think that this should narrow down the suspect pool. This was not an ordinary layperson. This seems like a professional to a certain degree. This seems like someone who was either regularly employed or educated in one of the professions that I listed off. Undertaker, mortuary assistant, or how about medical doctor and surgeon? So let's see. And then the famous LAPD detective Jigsaw John St. John, who was to inherit the case many years later, stated that while the perpetrator may have had some anatomical knowledge, that wasn't necessary in the medical profession. Of course, the greater significance was the manifest fascination of the killer with death. Okay, so that doesn't really help us too much, and if anything, To those of you who follow my segment about Jack the Ripper every Wednesday here on Black Box Online Radio, you guys will know that this is the same problem. People are saying, well, Jack the Ripper had to have been a medical doctor because he removed organs from the victims, the kidney, the uterus, part of the bladder, and the heart, with Mary Kelly, the heart. But in all seriousness, everybody says the same things. Well, it seems like he knows something about anatomy, but that doesn't immediately mean that he was a medical doctor. Instead, that also could be the exact same stuff. Mortuary assistant, butcher, those professions come up all the time. So we're stuck in the exact same place. But, one of the other frustrating aspects of the Black Dahlia case is that there really isn't going to be a lot of physical evidence. You heard very clearly that her body was scrubbed with a coconut bristle brush, and this person was really trying hard to get rid of any type of evidence, and that includes DNA, which means that the killer's DNA is probably not on her body. And I really don't believe that there would be any DNA in the Black Dahlia case, and that's going to make this one very difficult to solve. And I was watching Forensic Files for 25 years, and one thing that I gathered from that program is fingerprints can be left on the body. Like, if the killer is handling Elizabeth Short's body, fingerprints would also be left behind. But one way to eliminate that is by scrubbing the body with a coconut bristle brush, and just destroying all forms of physical evidence, and the brush bristles did not prove to be beneficial in identifying a suspect. The physical evidence in this case is very, very flimsy, and it just makes us wonder, how are we going to solve the Black Dahlia? I was talking about this recently on Ripper Wednesday. How do we solve the Jack the Ripper case? And to you listening to this right now, I think it might be possible for some people to find a suspect and actually identify the correct suspect. You might not be able to convince everyone that you know who the killer was or who the assailant was, the perpetrator. I also talk about D.B. Cooper here on this channel, so I don't want to call every culprit in an unsolved mystery a killer, because I'm not convinced that D.B. Cooper killed anyone. But as far as the actions and activities of the Black Dahlia Avenger go, it seems like maybe somebody could actually identify the right suspect, and they could create a circumstantial case that they find to be compelling, that you and I might agree with. We might not convince everyone, but I do think it's possible to actually identify the culprit. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you believe that it is possible to solve the Black Dahlia case? And that will be a challenge question for you. Do you believe that it is possible to solve the Black Dahlia case? Let's keep going. 2 key items of information relating to the mutilations were withheld from public disclosure. These were to be kept secret as an aid in interviewing potential suspects. They were facts that only the killer would know. For the moment, also, only the killer knew a third fact. Who was Jane Doe number 1? Well, of course, that's when there was the discovery. They didn't know her identity, but Elizabeth Short's body, and Elizabeth Short was identified relatively quickly. And I would actually like to cite Pew Eatwell's book, Black Dahlia Red Rose, for providing the coroner's report from Dr. Frederick Newbarr, and that's what I was reading from there. I'm just getting started into Black Dahlia Red Rose, but as I've gathered, she's going to be exploring the Black Dahlia suspect, Leslie Dillon, and this is something that's been heavily criticized by Larry Harnish, who is the host of a bi-monthly AMA about the Black Dahlia on YouTube. His channel's name is Larry Harnish, and he does one about George Hodel and one about the Black Dahlia, and focusing on people other than George Hodel and Steve Hodel. But George Hodel was a real suspect in the Black Dahlia case, and I had the opportunity to watch the most recent AMA, and he was talking about, why did certain people become suspects? Why did certain people go under surveillance and other people did not? And with George Hodel, he was a medical doctor who lived in the area at the time. His specialty was venereal diseases. And what they did was they looked at all medical professionals who had criminal past specifically relating to sex offenses. And George Hodel would ultimately be accused of sexual assault and misconduct by his daughter Tamar in 1949. And this is when George Hodel leaves and goes to Hawaii. But as far as the actions and activities of law enforcement, this was not even so much relevant to George Hodel. Larry Harnish's comments were more about a different suspect named Dr. Walter Bailey. And I think the real question was, why was George Hodel a suspect and Walter Bailey was not, when Dr. Walter Bailey was a medical doctor who owned a property in the vicinity of the dump site, not like immediately next door, but he had a home close by to the dump site. And also, it seems like he was dealing with the early stages of Alzheimer's or dementia, and it was affecting his thinking. And a lot of you guys in the comments section have brought this to my attention, that the early onset of Alzheimer's or dementia can lead people to do very destructive and abnormal and violent things. And I'm just like, all right, I will accept that. I will accept that. And if this guy didn't have any sex offenses or any suspicions to be on the police radar, they may not have looked at him. I think he's one of the most fascinating suspects right now, but we're going to see what's going to happen. But Larry Harnish, is also very well aware that Walter Bailey was 66 years old at the time of the Black Dahlia murder. I've been talking about him a lot on recent Dahlia Thursdays because I think he's a strong suspect. I definitely think he's a stronger suspect than some of the people out there, like Jack Anderson Wilson, whom I was talking about last week. That guy sounds like a habitual liar. He's discussed in the book Severed by John Gilmore. He just seems like a liar and a fraud, somebody who wanted food and drink and money. So he made up a bunch of wild stories and pretended to be an informant. But really, I would like to turn it over to you right now. What do you think about anything that's been covered in this episode? What do you think about the autopsy report? Do you agree or disagree with me that this is not a typical case of a woman rejecting a man, so then he retaliated? I think that this might be a woman rejecting a man who had a combination of mental illnesses. Maybe she even looked at him the wrong way. Maybe she did something that provoked him completely unintentionally, but definitely I think that this is a case of somebody with mental health problems attacking Elizabeth Short. And that's what the heart and soul of it is, because then it's not about the rejection. That's the point that I was really trying to get to. Then it's not about anything that she necessarily did. I mean, she might not even have looked at the guy or something, and he just blindsided her. We simply do not know how Elizabeth Short got to the killer's home. Mind you, or the killer's location where this crime was committed. And I want to reinforce that because it just seems like that this crime is done in such a deranged and physical way, yet the person still has the awareness to commit surgical-style murders. That's when it starts to make a lot more sense that this was somebody who had a combination of mental illnesses, but they were able to hide it from people in their daily life. So things are getting a little bit clearer, but what were those mental illnesses specifically? Well, that I can't tell you right now. Did you hear anything in the report that stood out to you? Anything that seemed like it was completely shocking, or that you think would provide any new type of insight into the Black Dahlia murder? And if you have any responses, you can drop a comment in the section down below. And you guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there's also a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page. The images that you see from this program are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook. And there is also a podcast version of this program available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime and Black Box Podcast. This program comes to you Monday through Friday, talking about the Zodiac Killer, Madeleine McCann, Jack the Ripper, and the Black Dahlia on Thursdays, and D.B. Cooper on Fridays. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. And that allows you to make a donation or a contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And I will see you tomorrow for an episode about D.B. Cooper. Until next time.